Good evening and welcome to the 22nd meeting of fiscal year 2016 Milton Planning Board. I'm Brian Furs. I'm the chair of the Planning Board. I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Alex Whiteside, I'm a member.
Michael Kelly, member.
William Clark, Planning Director.
Julia Getman, clerk.
Tim Serwinski, Assistant Town Planner.
Emily Ennis, member.
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
Okay. Our administrative items, our next meeting dates are April 28th. We'll then be meeting May 2nd, 3rd, and 5th, which is town meeting. Tentatively, those are those dates. And then May 12th will be the meeting after town meeting. We have minutes to approve.
I gave my comments to the clerk.
Does anyone else have any comments?
Any comments? Were they significant enough
Yeah, I don't
that we
think I
should?
have.
They were
table them?
fairly significant.
Are they in here?
I gave them to her before the meeting.
Oh, okay, they're not photocopied. Shall we recirculate then? We'll recirculate those for approval at the next meeting. If you could just circulate them with the edits, we'll approve them for you at the next meeting. Before we move on to citizen speak, one other item that's not on the agenda, I'd like to take this moment to recognize Emily Innes. This is her last planning board meeting as a 10-year member of the planning board. She's been someone that the town has relied on for longer than 10 years for her knowledge and her experience. And while she is getting off right now for a vacation, we are expecting it's not a retirement. So the board thanks you for your service, and I believe we'd like to offer you a standing ovation.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure working with all of you. It has been both members and staff and the various people who have appeared in front of the board over the years, and it has certainly been both a pleasure and an honor to serve the town. So, thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, just quickly, our agenda tonight includes citizen speak. We'll then have a new business discussion at some point on an A&R for 341 to 349 Harlan Street. We'll also have an informal discussion of the Carberry Walcott development. We have two public hearings scheduled, one at 7:15 for Kinsale Lane subdivision revision, which is continued from March 10th, and we will then have a 7:30 p.m. Public hearing on Home Inc. site plan approval modification. We do have one item on our agenda, which is marked for old business, which is the discussion of the Wentworth Farm Ford Ranch Road cluster development. That has been canceled this evening, so if you are here only for that, there is no need for you to stick around. And we will have a discussion time allowing on zoning issues and process for future town meetings. So we will get started with citizen speak. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak on anything that is not on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one, we will move on to our first item of new business, which is the A&R for 341 to 349 Highland Street. Mr. Clark? Is this yours, or is this Tim?
No.
Oh, great.
Good evening, Attorney Bob Sheffield. I submitted a plan for A&R approval. This is a situation where there are two houses on the one lot, and somebody has lived in one of the houses for 17 years and wants to buy it, and they cannot buy it because it's not a separate lot, and we went to the Board of Appeals, and the Board of Appeals approved it. And the last thing now, before drafting the deed, would be to secure your approval that this does not come under the subdivision control laws.
It seems to me that you should have on this that reference to the fact that we're endorsing this under authority of the variance that was granted.
And that should be on the,
Is it on, they did?
Yes.
Did they?
The third note.
and
This
it's,
plan is
Oh, I
endorsed
was
pursuant to
looking
the
at-
authority.
Oh, okay, good.
Yes.
Because you've got a variance for these two lots, and all we're doing is approving a plan that the Board of Appeals has approved.
Correct.
One more? Oh, he's got one. No? I'll get one.
Earlier version.
Yes.
I think that's perfect.
Ike, do you have one?
Yeah, I just handed it to Alex.
Is this different than the one we received in our packets?
It is. It's
Okay.
got the notes.
It
that
has,
Alex is
it has the
referring to.
note that they've got a variance
Okay,
to
I now have 3 copies of that.
dispense with some frontage.
We got the plan
Yeah.
early, and the notes got put on afterwards, before Mr. Keefe signed the plan.
Okay.
As soon as he came back from his vacation and he went to stamp it, he added in the new notes.
Excellent.
Okay, any other questions? Any questions from the board? Any discussion? All right, motion?
I would make a motion that we authorize Mr. Clark to endorse this plan as not requiring subdivision approval.
I would second that motion.
Any discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, it's 7:10. We have a public hearing at 7:15. I don't believe we'll have time to get into the Carberry discussion at this point, so we have a moment to discuss. How about an update from the staff?
Oh, how about a discussion on that 7:15 first? The 7:15 is going to be continued until March 10th.
Okay.
March 10th.
May 10th. I'm reading right over your shoulder.
It's May 10th, okay.
May 10th, sorry.
May
May
12th.
12th.
You want to
What a site.
Yes.
sidewalk.
I know that, but
Okay, gotcha.
I
So,
think there's a time issue here because that clock says 7:10 and this clock says 7:18. So I don't.
But we can discuss the site walk
yes,
before we
that's
open
what
it.
I'm going
before we
And then
open the
we'll
hearing,
continue
and
it.
by then, after we discuss the
7:10
sidewalk,
here.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
7:15.
that sounds like a perfect idea.
Hello there.
Hello there, Mr. Corcoran. So you're looking for a site walk?
Yes, I think, if you recall, we talked about the subdivision, kind of the unique nature of the property, the subdivision, the roadway that was built, Kinsale Lane, comes in off of Walcott Avenue. It's a fairly flat, straight roadway. And then as you get to the end of the first lot that was created, it drops off fairly dramatically. There's about a 10 to 12-foot grade change from Walcott down to the Cohane's property. And I know that Alex went out and walked the property, and he and I discussed the notion that it would be helpful for the board to really walk the site and to see it, and to understand what and how we're suggesting from how the roadway should be built perspective. We think that would be helpful and help inform the board's idea about doing that. So I would recommend that the board convene a site walk. I would also, maybe in conjunction with a site walk that you could do for the Carberry Estate, I think that would also be helpful for the board to do that sooner rather than later to gain some understanding of the property. And so maybe on the same Saturday morning, if it's convenient, we could arrange for both.
Okay.
And Curry College.
because of the, Curry College has pavers that the grass grows through the pavers. It already has grass on it. It was approved for the loop road that goes around their new dormitory. It's right down the street from Dennis's house, so Kinsale.
Yeah.
So it would be a perfect opportunity to look at what could go on Kinsale.
Sounds good.
And I've been and looked at this. It really, you've got to see it. You've got to see it to. Something can be done, but what's currently on the plan, I don't think is at all perfect.
Okay. I would throw out the 23rd for the 7th in the morning, which are both Saturday mornings.
I can't do the 23rd, so if it's possible, like, to do the 7th,
We can always do it in the evening also,
or you could do it on a weekday evening.
because it's now daylight savings time.
It's still laid out now.
Yeah. We can try for an evening. What time does it get dark? I mean, yeah, we could do that. If we're going to try to
Do
cram
start.
Carberry, and I can get in by 6:30.
6:30. I'm looking at,
Cheryl, is that?
Oh, I just think that might be a little hard to do, get it in before dark at that hour. So I
Especially
think we're
if
better
we're
on
trying to do
Saturday.
Carberry. I'd
Yeah.
rather do a Saturday if we can. It makes,
The 7th and the 23rd, both are okay for me.
is the 7th all right?
May 7th? Early.
Actually,
Yeah,
the
early, I agree.
23rd is not good, sorry.
Oh,
So
it doesn't work for Ned anyway.
Right, so the 7th is good.
Okay.
May 7th?
May 7th, what time is the board's pleasure? 8?
8?
That work for you, Cheryl?
That's fine.
Okay.
8 at,
Kinsale.
Start at Kinsale? Okay.
Right.
We will meet at 1 Kinsale Lane at 8 o'clock.
well, actually, that's the
Is that?
new house.
Yep.
So we're going to meet at
It's easier to park at that house than drive,
At
figure out how to
the
get to Dennis's
existing house, the older house.
And that's 1035 Brush Hill Road.
Right.
So do you want to meet at
Is
10:35?
that back driveway?
Well, 1035 Brush Hill Road is Dennis's house.
Okay.
But we'll meet there, but you can park on Kinsale Lane because it
Yeah,
is.
that's just a lot easier is what I'm getting, yeah, than trying to drive to 10:35. So we'll meet at 1, park at 1 Kinsale Lane. Great. And it'd be great if Curry could open their gate on Atherton that morning, if possible.
I will ask.
Keep us from having to drive all the way around.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we are all clocks aligned at this point. It looks like we can open the 7:15 hearing. And it sounds like I need a motion. Before we do move to continue, is there anyone here that's looking to speak to Kinsale Lane since it was an advertised hearing? Okay, great.
When are we, the sidewalk
So we're continuing
is
to the,
not the hearing.
correct.
So we're continuing the hearing till the
12th.
12th.
12.
Yes, May 12th.
We're going to, at that same site walk, put those other 3 on that agenda. Same for
Yes.
But we're agreed,
Kinsale, Curry, and
right, we're agreed on that.
Carberry Estate.
Yes, we're agreed on that.
Yep.
We
So I
haven't-
move that we continue this hearing until the 12th at, Bill?
7th. At
7th,
the 7th, May 7th?
12th.
12th.
The 7th
The
would be,
hearing.
the
all
7th
right,
would be
the
town
hearing
meeting.
on the 12th, yes.
Yes.
The hearing on the
7th is
12th.
Saturday.
At,
7:15.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All right. Now, would you like to give a staff update, Mr. Clark? Because I don't believe we still have time for the Carberry discussion.
Really?
Well, I've watched a bit of Concom last night, so I don't think we have time for it yet.
I didn't.
But it's okay, that gives you plenty of time for a staff update.
No, that's what you get when you take off 10 days. I've been dealing with the Ullin Skating Rink lease, getting somebody to run it next year, looking at the 25-year lease. Been talking with different assisted living developers for a couple of different sites, primarily the site that we looked at the old Horseplay site. Met with DPW, several developers looking at that particular site, dealing with some of the legal issues with town council, one of them being Thayer, that we got to stay in their special permit for a little bit. Dealing with signs for Dunkin' Donuts, Super Petroleum, and Milton Nails and Spa.
Bill, what happened with the sign at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, was it earlier this week, right?
It continued until, there's a neighborhood meeting next Wednesday, and then that goes to the selectmen again, I believe it's May 2nd.
And did the Board of Selectmen discuss the sign review committee's recommendations?
Yes, sign review committee was there, gave their recommendations. Recommendations were keeping the sign where it is, at the height that it is, lighting the top panel with backlit letters on Super Petroleum. Back panel is not lit. It's red aluminum, so it can't come through. The two panels right below are white aluminum with black lettering on it. Then are the 3 price numbers. On the north side of the sign, the sign that faces the neighborhood, there is limousine tinting over the numbers so that they get blocked out. The woman who lives there said that the numbers don't make an issue anymore. The signage in the windows, all the signage in the windows will be gone. He's already taken the signage off the top, the top fascia. The logos on the pumps will stay. The ice machine will lose 4 of its signs. It's got 5 signs now that tell you ice.
Wow.
It's going to have 1. The awnings over the door, the awning over the SP Mart will say SP Mart in red. It'll be a red with white lettering, red on the rest of the windows. The awning over the Auto Care will say Auto Care. It's a white awning with black letters. That's it for signage on the building. That's what the sign review committee requested of the applicant, and we're waiting to hear what the selectmen say. What'd I miss?
Not much. We started a hearing with the selectmen on Monday. It was continued until sometime in May, and next Wednesday night, we're having a neighbor meeting at the site to look at it. The owner has agreed to look at the feasibility of lowering the full height of the sign at the request of the neighborhood. So we've agreed to do that, evaluating what the costs and other issues would be associated with that, and if we can, he will try to accommodate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Would the assisted living be under the zoning that we did?
Yes,
So they don't need any, would it be the same?
yes.
Same,
You have to let him finish the sentence so we can use up the time, Bill.
Okay.
Exactly.
it just takes a little time for these things to happen, is what you're saying.
It does. Between the developer and the owner, what the owner wants for his future land use, what the developers are willing to pay, and what it's going to cost the developers for infrastructure. We met with DPW to try to figure out what those requests will be, between looping the water lines, where the sewer lines will come from, what they'll use for frontage, how they'll access the property, so what the access road would have to be built to. The issue of sidewalk and lighting, bus stops, we get it all done before we get an application.
Did you say there were other sites or just this site that's the focus?
I have people looking at 3 different sites, but one in particular, and it is this one. This one meets everything with the zoning, and it's fairly simple and uncomplicated. Maybe expensive, but it's uncomplicated.
Do you recall how many acres that site is?
I'm sorry?
Do you recall how many acres that site is?
It's a tad over 5.
Okay.
Great. Do you have 6 more minutes of material?
You could tell us about the zoning update. One of you could tell us about the zoning
I'll
update.
give that to Tim.
So we've been working on reformatting the zoning to fit the table of contents and the format that was passed by town meeting in 2014. I said we were this close at the last meeting. We are this close now. That's gone out to the planning board for review. I welcome any sort of comments or edits that you've got. Once that's done, it'll be up on the website. It'll be very well organized. It'll be all of the new zoning from 2009 up until not the most recent town meeting because we haven't gotten Attorney General approvals yet, but
October 2015?
Yes.
I
I
think
mean,
yeah,
not that we
up
had anything, but it
Right.
goes through that, it's the most recent, okay.
So
Couldn't get February because
AG's not
it
done.
won't be
yeah.
done until May.
Yep.
and we'll be working with the IT department to put that up on the website in a way that's very well organized and easy to get to and easy to read. It's been a heavy lift. Everyone has been working very hard on it, but it'll be easy to read. The prose might be dense, but the format will not be dense. So you'll be able to look at it.
When we put it on the web, it will be broken out into sections
Okay,
so that you don't have to download a 9 megabyte document. You can, the section that you need, you can get the table of contents, go back and then pick up that particular section, so it should be a little quicker. You want the whole thing, you can have the whole thing, but we'll break it up for you so that you can. Now, that goes back to when we change zoning at a town meeting, instead of having to change that whole document, instead of having the formatting nightmare that we have right now, we'll be able to change a section,
right.
and it won't have that ripple effect.
And the beauty of the reformat is that the zoning bylaws go from 130, 140 some odd pages. So the most relevant sections of the zoning for anyone that's doing any sort of day-to-day regular folk work is down to like 50-something pages. So it really has taken a lot of the really long, lengthy one-off passages and put them in an appendix. So it'll be, it really is going to be just a much better product, I think.
Just to make sure, so when you put it on the site, you'll put one file is the whole thing.
Yep.
And then one file, well, the rest will be table of contents as a file, chapter 1, chapter 2. That would be really good, because I do a lot of zoning work, and the towns that
No.
make you either download it chapter by chapter or download the whole thing, yeah,
We're
okay,
doing
good. The
sections.
flexibility is good.
We'll give you both.
Oh, and those PDFs will be searchable?
I was
Oh,
Just going
excellent.
to ask that.
That's the other thing I was going to complain
The
about.
worst is when you go to some town and they've scanned their zoning and you can't search it. It's terrible.
Yes, just using one of those today. It was not pleasant.
That leaves this board all kinds of time to be able to go back and start changing some of those zoning pieces that the building inspector keeps coming in with. I want to look at this one, so he can pick on sections, not the document.
Great.
Is it possible to get a chart for dimensional criteria?
Yes.
I've
would
always
be
wanted a
ideal.
table of uses
Yes.
and a table of dimensional standards would be
I
great.
did start one before, so yes.
Yeah.
Right, searching through, trying to find things in the
Yep.
Zone B via those paragraphs is laborious.
Tedious.
Yeah.
Tedious, yes.
Good progress.
Yeah, nice
Yeah,
job.
it's
Yeoman's work.
We're working hard on it. I know it's been a long time coming. I know the warrant committee has also been asking for this for quite some time. So I'm really hoping to give them a hand.
Great.
Great.
Thank you. I have 7:27, so we're almost there.
I've been working with the Animal Shelter Advisory Committee. We've been doing some work on getting an RFQ for design services out for that. I've also been working with the South Shore Home Consortium and the South Shore Fair Housing Committee. If you're not busy, I know this board is busy on April 28th with a meeting. Are you going to go? Oh, excellent. You should sign up.
I already did.
Okay, good. So there's going to be a Fair Housing 101 educational event at Braintree Town Hall on the evening of April 28th. There is free pizza if you register by the 26th. If you are a human being that lives somewhere, fair housing affects you. So I recommend that anyone out there watching on TV or here in the audience should sign up for that event. There'll be a link on the town homepage tomorrow morning. It's going to be a great event. There's going to be some good panelists and some good representatives from across the South Shore to talk about fair housing issues, which are super duper important. So,
Great.
Get
Forward
out
to a
there.
report back on that.
Future. I have 7:28 on mine.
Yeah, so do I.
I do too.
And the animal shelter? Oh, we have 2
Yeah, what's the
minutes.
timeline on that? Ish. Definitely ish.
I am not going to commit to a timeline. We are in the process of trying to figure out some geotechnical work on the site, and that's sort of the last piece of the puzzle to get before we put out an RFQ for design services. That committee actually just got reappointed on Monday. They've been working very hard, and it's going to be it's slow going. I know all the people that have been following this for many years would really like to see that shelter done, but we are doing it right, and it's going to be a great facility.
Great, thanks.
When is the next master plan implementation committee meeting?
The date has not been set, so that's a good reminder. I will have Tim circulate a few options. We had said the end of April, around town meeting, yeah.
Okay. All right, well done, everyone. Mr. Sheffield, why don't you come forward for the home inc hearing, and by the time you take your seat, we should be able to open the hearing.
Take your time.
We have
Good evening
7:30 on this clock, so go ahead.
Okay, good evening again. Back in, I live currently at Home Inc. Home Inc. has 98 senior citizen housing units there. I sent each of you an invitation to take a drive through. I hope that you have the opportunity to go through, because most of the people in the town have not seen Home Inc. because it is kind of hidden away, and all of our perimeter is, we put a conservation easement on it so that we are just where we want to be, just what we want to be. Last year, somebody wanted to put a 3-season addition on the existing unit, and somebody said, well, what did the site plan review say in 1979? And there was a search, diligent search, and somebody found the handwritten site plan approval. And they looked at it and said, oh my God, this says you can't do anything. You can't put a deck on, you can't put a lighting fixture outside the unit. You can't add sidewalks if you wanted to. You couldn't put a shed out there to house gasoline engines that at one time was stored in the basement of the community house, which creates a safety issue. And you can't cut down a tree or do something without coming back to the planning board. Also, as far as screening is concerned, we really have not put up trees for purposes of screening, because we are totally screened. We are hardly visible from Canton Avenue, invisible from Blue Hills Parkway. We are next to 7 acres of conservation land between us and Guile Road. And there are maybe two houses that are quite distant from us that are really abutters. And that is about it. So what we'd like to do is to amend the site plan approval so it does not any longer require coming back to the planning board for changes relating to a deck. We are in the process now of digging up roads, and we have already replaced the main road, which is Pine Tree Brook Road and Evergreen Road. Next month, we are going to start the reconstruction of Azalea Drive and Cherry Blossom Lane. And we think we should be able to do, this work and whatever needs to be done in our community without the need of coming back to the planning board. I put in suggested language so it would indicate what we feel would be appropriate. And I hope you would favorably consider it.
I have a question to start. What is your neighborhood or condo association approval policy to changes such that if someone wanted to add a deck or enlarge a deck on their unit, how
Most of the
would
time-
an abutting unit weigh in on that?
Okay, it used to be that they'd have to come to the board. Most of the time, they'd have to pay for it if they were going to do anything ornate. The fact of the matter is, we love people to make improvements because when they come in, they buy it for X number of dollars, and they don't actually buy it, they buy a lifetime lease. And then when they leave, they get back exactly what they paid. And if they made $20,000 of improvements, that reaps to the benefit of the future people that will occupy it. So we don't have, I know that Mr. Whiteside thought that, if we reduced, the controls, there might be covered decks and additions to the building. Well, if there's going to be any addition to the building that would be in the perimeter of the building, we'd have to come back to the planning board. If we're going to replace a deck, and a lot of these decks now are 30 to 35 years old, and they are in need of repair or replacement. And we obtain the building permits and we do the normal things that are done, but the idea is that we feel that we really shouldn't have to come back to the planning board on each and every occurrence.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I guess my question really would deal with, you've added language that says that this section shall not prohibit the erection or enlargement of decks. I don't personally have a problem with replacement, and I don't necessarily have a problem with erection or enlargement. My question is, what if the abutting unit owner is concerned about making a deck larger or putting a deck where there isn't a deck currently?
They can speak to it, and then it would be resolved by the board of directors.
Okay. So is there a requirement for any of these improvements to go before the board of directors before they get a building permit?
That's correct.
Okay.
Can you put that in here?
Sure.
That would be helpful.
The other thing is, for example, lighting. We have a policy that if anybody calls the office and says that on the path between the front door and the driveway, I don't feel safe because there's an inadequate light, we usually put up a light within 96 hours. we are very, responsible for that. Now, I think what was intended was light poles should not be erected or taken down without coming back to the board. And that's why I put the language in here, no light over 8 feet tall should be, anything over 8 feet tall would have to have the approval of the board, this board. But anything that would be under 8 feet tall would be an internal issue.
Emily?
On the lighting, we have in recent zoning amendments for various different types of development, we've been putting in requirements for compliance with international dark sky standards. And obviously, it would be unfair to put that in because you've got an existing site plan modification process here now. But I do note on 5, you have all lighting shall be shielded and directed properly to avoid shining into abutters' homes. I'm wondering if you would consider adding to that and to avoid contributing to sky glow, which hits the same general idea. In other words, you're not allowing light to shine up. It hits the same general idea, but it doesn't put quite as many restrictions on particular fixtures. And if you guys would be willing to add that, and that's it's not a request we can enforce at this meeting because it's not something that you're asking for. I'm just wondering if that would be a possibility. So you can think about it a bit.
President, Vice President, Treasurer, I think that's reasonable.
That seems reasonable.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
What's
How are the directors elected?
Yes, they are.
How are they elected?
They're elected by the members, which includes all the residents and all the people who are on the, quote, short list that have put in a $3,000 security deposit.
Oh, so it's residents and short list. That's
Yes.
interesting.
So my concern is, I did actually take you up on your invitation to drive through, and I did drive through. And I noticed that it's a fairly tight area, and it's a very beautiful area. But I do think that if everyone wanted a deck, it would be different. It would be different than the way it is now. And now you would come to the planning board and set forth a plan showing what you want, and if it was sensitive and well-designed, you presumably get approval. I just don't, I'd be interested to know what the process is. Is there a public hearing?
No?
Well,
What do you mean?
there
public
should be
hearing?
a public hearing on a deck request, because these are people who are, in essence, owners of their units.
Within your association, is there a meeting
Oh,
with the board
yes.
of directors?
There's a meeting with the Board of Directors. The Board of Directors is open to the public.
I understand, but it seems to me that that process is inadequate.
If I live in Unit 1 and you live in Unit 2, I want to put a new deck on. I want to make mine larger. Who do I have to go to start the process?
You'd start to go to the manager, the executive director,
okay.
who's Jim Walker, and...
We do that, and I say, this is what I want. You living next door don't want it to be that big. Do you get to say?
Oh, yeah. You
Okay.
definitely get to say,
Do the other residents get notice of this?
Is there notice of the
Is
meeting?
there
that-
a public hearing on the request, like there would be if it came to the planning board?
Public
If-
related to the association.
Yes.
Well, an association hearing, a
Yes.
hearing within the association, and then, some sort of standards that the directors will follow if they're going to allow a new deck. Because if it simply is that we like this person, they can have a deck, we don't like this person, they can't have a deck, that's not good enough.
okay. Currently, there are 100 structures, and I believe 92 of them have decks. So we're really, and some of the ones that don't have deck can't have a deck because they don't have a backyard, or there's not really any ability to do it. But what we're talking about is when we are replacing a deck or we are changing something, we want to be able to do it here within the organization. If everybody, all of these are 3-unit structures or 4-unit structures, and townhouse style. And if the people in the townhouse kind of all agree that this, should be done and this is good, then for the most part it's reviewed by the board of directors, but there's not let's say, an adversarial hearing. They allowed to go ahead and do it. If there is contention over it, then there is notice, but that is very, very rare.
But you've only been since the 70s to the planning board how many times?
Well, we should have been to the planning board maybe 80 times. Because the original plans did not provide a deck on any of the units. However, nobody had the site plan approval until last year. And
Okay, well, that's interesting.
Now-
Cheryl?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering then on the enlargement, if you were to put some language in that if for any enlargement, that you would have an agreement or a meeting of your residents that would be open to all residents who in the area are in the development who
complex.
in the complex, thank you.
Development.
All residents in the complex who could weigh in on that, because it seems
That's
to
fine.
me,
No, that's fine. We could
replacement
put in that
of in
language.
kind is, should not need to come back to us, and I don't think an enlargement really should either, if there's a mechanism for the neighbors to be able to have a say.
Right.
And I think that's maybe what Alex is getting at, is, having that mechanism, if you put that in writing, that you do have that mechanism, then I
That's
think,
fine.
from my point of view, that would be,
I would associate it with erection or enlargement.
yeah,
Yes,
direction
a
or
n-
enlargement, right.
A new one or an enlarged
Right,
one, yeah, I
right.
agree.
That would
I don't
be
think
fine.
it's necessary for replacement.
And then,
Committee too.
What?
There is an architectural committee.
Yes.
We have discussed.
Yeah, we do have an architectural committee that meets regularly and reports to the board.
So then referencing that in here would be.
Pardon me?
Referencing that in here, that they would
But
review that.
having just being able to review what the procedure is
Yep, absolutely.
for the board, because these people are in effect owners of their units, and they deserve a say,
I have another comment, sorry.
as do I. But you go ahead first.
No, please finish.
Okay, I want to discuss trees.
I wanted to discuss.
The trees are hugely important, and boards of directors generally, you remember the large oak tree. Owners
Cannot forget that.
often want to get rid of trees, and others sometimes resist this. And it does seem to me that there needs to be a tree policy, because there needs to be a tree policy, because it really is a nice looking development, and there are a lot of trees, and the trees are getting older, and the trees are getting bigger, and I know what management thinks about trees often, and so that's my suggestion, that you come up with a tree policy.
Okay, you see the location of Home Inc. on what I just passed out. The dark green are wetlands. The light green, believe it or not, is all conservation land. So we don't even cut down trees in that area. The only time we will trim a tree is if it is getting old and it looks like it could land on one of our units. So basically, trees in a normal development would be a situation that we really have to look at. In this community, it's not, because of the fact that so much of it has a conservation easement in which you cannot remove a tree. And we don't remove the trees, and the trees fall down. It raises the question, if a tree falls down, nobody is there, does it make a sound? But that's a different... So I don't think we need to be overly concerned with trees. I know that the bushes are maturing, and sometimes they're, need to be replaced, and we, pull out the bushes, or we
Emily has a question.
cut down a tree and replace that.
Street trees?
What?
Do you have street trees? I have actually been to Home Inc., but not for a while, so I remember the buildings, but do you have trees along the street that are part of the complex?
Yes, but they're smaller trees.
Okay.
They're deciduous, and
Do you have a regular replacement?
we don't.
You do? I can see a
haven't-
nod.
We haven't replaced them.
If something goes down, we replace it.
Okay,
If something goes down, we replace it. But most of the time,
great, thank you.
That would be one of the, I guess that would be one option, would be, the way this is written there, it allows for the removal of trees, plants, and bushes for purposes of maintenance and beautification.
right.
Is there an opportunity to suggest that trees and bushes that are removed will be replaced? They don't necessarily have to be replaced maybe in the same location, but from a numbers perspective, tree for tree, bush for bush.
Yeah.
In fact, most of the time, we're putting in more new rather than
Right, that's,
just a one-for-one replacement.
okay. Did you have another question?
Well, I am saying that, giving Home Inc. free rein to do certain landscaping is, we're going to basically have to do the same for other developments in town where we've approved site plans, if we're going to be consistent. And if we're not going to be consistent, somehow we have to figure out why we are not going to be consistent, and what is special about Home Inc. that makes it, you've got an answer already. This is,
I have
and
a
you're
sim-
leaving the board tonight. This is terrible.
I'm getting all my ideas out before I leave. The last round. We had talked a few months ago about standardizing a tree and shrub list. I think we'd looked at the city of Boston, but the idea of having lists of acceptable trees that were suitable for our particular climate, and it might be that we could reference that in here as well. So as part of the tree policy and
tree
shrub
policy.
policy that you are referring to, we could start standardizing that so that every time a subdivision or other development comes up, we have a standard reference that we use.
I mean, currently, the site plans show the landscaping, and the landscaping, if they want to change it, they come to the planning board, and usually, I mean, maintenance is one thing, but if they want to change the landscaping, then they come to the planning board, and
Has that been something in practice, though?
No.
That anybody has done in town? To
Well,
come
I
back
don't
to
know
us
that
when they
they've
have
done
to
it.
replace
I
their
don't know
apple tree?
Certainly Home Inc. hasn't.
Well, I'm just thinking of other, Winter Valley, Fuller Village. Has anybody come back to us when they change their landscaping?
I
No.
don't think so. I
don't think so.
Fuller
Not in
has.
my memory.
Fuller has, because they put things in. They change a road, they put in tennis courts, they move different things around.
Yeah, but that's
Those are-
not landscaping, that's
That's pretty
larger.
significant.
A tennis court is not landscaping, it is a.
But the
an
garden that
entity.
goes, the garden that gets put to the side
Yeah, but
does
my point
become
is, they're not
the
coming in for
roads.
the garden, they're coming in for the road or the tennis court, and the garden is, the movement of the garden is incidental, or the landscaping is incidental to the tennis court
They
or the
put it
road.
in,
Correct.
It's
there's
not that they're
mitigation
moving
for it.
the garden
No.
and they're coming.
They're
They're
providing
installing a
mitigation
road and then
for it.
moving.
Well,
that's-
I'd
that's
rather
not
not
the
be
only-
in the position, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I just, we keep talking about landscaping, but that's not the only thing they're talking about here.
You know, section number 4, which I'm now paying attention to, requires that trees or plantings used for, oh, I guess it's for
Used for
screening.
screening.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's the-
Well, I guess I just think it's going to be difficult thing to impose on folks to have us review when a tree or a bush here or there needs to be replaced and it wants to go someplace else, or maybe a different species. Maybe it's something, whether if it's a significant change in the landscaping, would have to come back to the planning board, but something that's deemed to be, maintenance, even if it's removal of a dead tree or a diseased tree or something. I mean, I can't imagine us getting bogged down with reviewing that sort of thing.
Well, and I think too, Alex had mentioned earlier, if we're going to have some sort of difference between this and other applications, we should specify that. I think the difference is that this is a complex that has already been developed for some years. We're not approving a new subdivision. We're not approving a new special permit. This is already in place. And so we're not actually approving any sort of new landscaping plan. And that is the difference between the other things that have come in front of us that are in fact brand new.
But the way this was written, we should be. And the question is, is that something we want to revisit? Which is, I think, what they've asked us to do, is to revisit that requirement.
We're asking to revisit because I believe that this was appropriate when it was a concept before we started building. And this was approved in 79, and then we started building in 80 through 83, okay? It's now 2016, and the same regimen really is irrelevant. That, I believe, is what we're saying. You did good planning at the time. It had a good outcome. We've been going on for 37 years. We still have some of our original people. But to have prohibitions, for example, more than half of our residents are over 80. Some live on streets that don't have sidewalks. If we wanted to add a sidewalk, should we be precluded from doing that without coming back to the board? And I'd say, no.
But that's what I was getting at earlier. We keep talking about landscaping. This is a lot more than landscaping.
Yeah.
I mean, this
It
is,
seems to me that you need a substitute procedure. I mean, these are owners, they need
They're not
a way
owners,
of,
it's a lifetime tenants.
they're lifetime, they're basically owners for life. It's different from renters. They're not renters, they're lifetime leaseholders, and they're in effect owners. In my view, you are in effect an owner, Mr. Sheffield. And I think that you deserve some rights to be heard. And I think the directors, if we're going to give up our power to review these things, need some standards that they have to proceed by. And I'd like to see a procedure submitted to take the place of planning board review.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So, and then I'd fairly soon like to hear from the public before we have too much more discussion from the board. But before that, on sidewalks, are you talking about sidewalks from units, or are you talking about sidewalks that are part of the right-of-way for the street? And as a second part of that, are these streets private or public? Who plows them?
Oh, we plow them.
Plow them, okay.
We go in and
So you plow, I mean, I understand you were doing the reconstruction. So on the sidewalks, you're talking about sidewalks that would be within that right-of-way?
remember, the whole thing is one, we don't have a right-of-way.
I'm
In
thinking
other words-
more of, you've got a constructed street. Are the sidewalks part and parcel of that constructed street, or are they sidewalks that are moving
Most
between
of
the
them are
units.
sidewalks that are parallel to the street.
I think you make a good suggestion. Shall we bring this to the public and then come back? Yes.
Is it just that?
One more, yeah,
makes-
sure.
Yeah. Was everybody in the complex notified that this was going to happen tonight?
Yes.
Great.
In fact, everybody on the shot list was.
All right, excellent. All right, is there anyone here that would like to speak on this behalf or against this application? All right, well, we've heard from the public.
So I think we've made some suggestions that would require revision of the language.
That's, we
Have
have
we
done
made
that.
all of the suggestions we were wanting to make?
Well, we might discuss sheds. I mean, sheds, there are many types of sheds. A train shed is quite a big shed. And other sheds are smaller
A
sheds.
train shed may
We're
be
talking about
unlikely
small
on this
sheds.
site.
Small sheds, I mean, maybe we.
And how many,
Square
I
footage
mean,
size.
what is the purpose of these sheds? Are these tool sheds? Are these just people in their backyard sheds?
Most of them are tool sheds. There aren't very many. There's only, I think, 3 now.
So would these be association sheds or sheds running to a unit?
We have at least 1 or 2 that are sheds for the use of the residents in certain buildings, and we have, I believe, 2 sheds that are the association equipment.
But they're all controlled by the association?
Everything is controlled by the association.
There's no unit that owns a shed, so to speak.
Correct. You couldn't put up your own shed.
What size are the sheds?
Maybe
Approximately.
5 by 8 or something along that
So
line.
would you be okay with putting a size in for shed that helps us define what shed is?
Sure.
Okay.
Like 10 by 10 or
Not to
8
exceed.
by 10?
Not to exceed size, right? Yeah.
Maybe, we should, I
the
mean, it
applicant
should
come
be
back to
a
us.
reasonable,
Right.
you know, standard shed,
Yeah.
but it does certainly, you might also say what these sheds are for. I think we don't want a proliferation of sheds.
Anything
At
over,
least I don't want a proliferation of sheds. You look at me as though,
I don't think we want a proliferation. If we have 4 sheds in 35 years, and 2 of them have been suggested by the building department for safety reasons, I mean, that's,
look, it seems to me it's the same deal. Have a procedure that you go through to make these changes that's going to replace the planning board, and bring it to us, and if it's reasonable, I think that we're likely to be reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the residents of the complex are supportive of having procedures in place to make these decisions, then I think that the planning board should be willing to turn it over to the association to make them.
That's
excellent.
fair.
So we're looking for the written procedure.
Right.
I have someone now from the public. You did, but you can come on, you can speak. Can you come up to the microphone though and introduce yourself, please?
You mentioned that your complex was open to Canton Avenue. So those folks across from your complex who are viewing into your backyards will be seeing these sheds and, I mean, I sat through the discussion over decks and stuff, so that's not gonna, you're not changing much there, but I
Everything.
imagine if
Could
I'm
you tell us
sitting
your name and
here.
address,
I'm
please?
sorry, Ted Phillips, Hemlock Drive, which is off Canton Avenue. So
Okay.
those folks here, across on Canton Avenue, or these folks who are looking into your
These
backyards
folks
with your shed.
definitely, yes.
Just beyond
This
all
is
the
all
lane.
conservation land.
Small cut.
So we
About how far
It's covered.
is that?
Does it-
This goes up
Sorry about
around
this
70
reference, if it
feet,
don't
this
align.
goes up around 50 feet.
50 feet?
So you have,
You have some screening?
oh, definitely.
If you look at the
Yeah.
the diagonal street
Yeah.
up there is
I didn't
Canton.
even know
I'm
it
just
was there.
thinking, if you're going to cede this
I've
control
been
to
here
this
for
body,
5 years, I didn't even know it was there.
other complexes may have less.
You're thinking sheds might be something we keep.
Yeah.
All right, I don't see that that should be a huge problem.
I understand the point. And the question would also be, do changes facing Canton Avenue, do those need to?
Well, maybe
Or
within the
include them
buffer
in-
zone. So any sheds to be located within the buffer zone would require to come to us, maybe.
Well, except they're
No,
crossed out
Buffer zone is
three.
Cannot be in the buffer
That's
zone.
the
Those
conservation
sheds
area.
can go in the buffer zone because it would be contrary to the conservation.
I guess
Commission.
I was not thinking of the conservation
Right.
term, definition of buffer zone. I was thinking of the area around your neighbors. Because not all of it's, is it conservation 360 all the way around?
Yes.
Okay.
What is the purpose of number 9? You added language, this does not prohibit the granting of a
Right.
conservation easement.
Yeah, what we're
And you crossed out
saying in
3.
number 9 is you can't do anything with your property over and above what's in the site plan. But I wanted to make it clear that, that our giving conservation easement on 14.02 acres, does not conflict with the planning board's approval.
I don't understand that, but if you look at number 3, it says areas designated as buffer zones are to be used only as buffer zones and are to be left in their natural state. And that's crossed out, and it says, see number 9. And
we've
I've
taken all-
seen number 9, but I don't
We've
see,
not the
taken
same
all the
thing.
I
buffer
don't see the
zones.
relevance.
Alex, we've taken all the buffer zones and made it a conservation easement, which has rules that are even stricter than, the buffer zone protection.
And you said that the the light shaded in green on here is the conservation land. Is
Correct.
that actually the formal line? Does this light green actually reflect the formal line, or is that more just the tree cover and a general indication?
No, that's the formal line as indicated by the DPW. and,
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not right.
Yeah. Because some of this green shading is actually going over some of the units, and it's ducking sort of in and out,
Exactly,
which is
the,
why I was wondering if, if I trace it out.
302 is in the
You know,
buffer zone.
there must be a plan we can reference, I would hope.
Yeah.
I would hope.
Somewhere there must be
And you
a
must have
formal
recorded
line.
something.
Now,
Yeah.
look, have you granted this easement or not?
Yes, we did in 1987.
All right, well, why don't, so this does not prohibit the granting of an easement. Why don't you just discuss the easement that you granted? Right? Because it's been granted. It obviously doesn't prohibit the granting of an easement because the easement's been granted.
Right.
But it
So
was
more of it-
granted without the involvement of this august body.
So it would be more of a notwithstanding you're
Right.
allowed to have,
Emily, this is the
the board
fantastic.
recognizes your,
definition of,
As long as the buffer areas are the
Are consistent.
conservation areas.
right.
But you don't actually have a map this is great as the meets and bounds of it, but you don't have a map.
What is it,
that,
coordinates?
no, and
North
actually,
and
Give that
east?
to you, Tim. to-
I tried to,
My astrolabe and
No, I was merely saying that you may want to
I
distribute it to
tried
the
to
board.
do it over a map, and
Meets and bounds are kind of a pain in the neck.
yeah, they really are.
Now, when you just tell me this for my interest, you granted a conservation easement of 14.02 acres.
Yes,
And did you do this by a deed to the Conservation Commission?
here is the conservation easement and the acceptance of the easement by the Board of Selectmen at that time. And Tim has the meets and bounds of
Maybe we could
the,
have him distribute that as well.
Well, we'll give this to Tim and we'll distribute it.
Yeah.
All right, Tim, here you are.
thank you.
when do we want to
Yeah, we'll need to,
meet again?
well, when will you be ready to do so? May
Couple of weeks,
Is May 12th going to work for
May
you?
12th would be fine.
Okay. So I will entertain a motion to continue to May 12th at 7:30 PM.
So moved.
Okay.
Do you want more time for Kinsale?
I don't know. Let's do it at 7:30 because who knows?
Okay. All right, do I have a second? All right, all in favor?
Thank you very much.
Aye. Thank you.
Emily, we'll miss your wisdom that you've given to this board for the last 10 years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sheffield. I'll miss working with you on the board.
Okay, we'll move on to the Carberry Walcott development discussion, please. This is a public meeting, not a public hearing, but I believe we have members of the public, so is the board interested in hearing from something in this discussion, or do we want to have this be mostly informational?
I think that if the public has questions, after the presentation, we should let those questions get addressed.
Very well, I'm on board with that.
It's reasonable.
Okay. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, and nice to be back. And particularly nice to be back with Jack Dawley from Northland Residential. And before I go any further, I'd like to congratulate you, Emily, here. I heard the clapping outside. I wasn't here.
Thank you very much.
Congratulated, and the work that you've done is to be applauded. But Ned Corcoran, I am an attorney. I live here in Milton, and I am here with Jack Dawley, who is the principal for Northland Residential, who spent a great deal of time with you in 2014 and 2015, dealing with the rezoning and special permit process for the property at the St. Pius Rectory site. We are now back. Jack has put the property owned by the Carberry family under agreement and is moving forward in a process that we hope will arrive at a rezoning at town meeting in October. We've had a number of meetings, conversations, presentations to date. We've met with some of the direct abutters one-on-one. We have met with most of the direct and/or legal abutters in a meeting that we hosted at Fuller Village. We've met with individual members of some of the boards in town, and this week we have spent and made presentations before the Board of Selectmen, the Historical Commission, the Conservation Commission, and now the Planning Board. Really an effort to present the plan as it's being proposed, to listen to and answer and respond to as many questions as we can, and to get this on television so that the town has a chance to see it, understand it, and more broadly ask questions, because this is perhaps one of the last significant pieces of property in Milton. It deserves the care and consideration that I believe that Jack has developing as he is developing his plan. It is a magnificent property. There are magnificent features that need to be protected, and we think that this plan that Jack is going to unveil does that, and it does it in the way that most effectively secures a level of economic return to the Carberry family that is necessary from their perspective. Jack is one of several suitors for the property. His proposal is the least dense in terms of its development, preserves significant and important features on the property, and generates enough of a return so that the Carberry family is comfortable working with him and recognizing that their 40-year stewardship of the property will continue significantly in that way. So with that, I'll hand it to Jack, and he can start in on the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for your time. Obviously, my name is Jack Dawley. So, yes, In the summer of 2014, I was introduced to the Carberrys by a local real estate broker as they had listed a portion, a 17-acre portion of the property for sale. And they thought that I might be interested in it. In sitting with the Carberrys and assessing the 17.5-acre parcel, which I'll say is to the left of the property as you face it from Canton Ave, it became apparent to us that that area didn't work for, we didn't see a viable development there for a couple of reasons. Number one, the topography, the land's defined by a couple of natural features that are important and worthy of maintenance. One is a geological feature called an esker that runs down where Ned is pointing, which is a significant topographical landform that really bisects the property, creates a nice buffer between the center of that parcel and the subdivision to the north or the east. There's a magnificent lawn area down in front of what we refer to as the manor house that is just, it's spectacular. We call it the manor house lawn. And there are a series of buildings in the back. And frankly, we didn't see a land use plan that made sense for that parcel. There are a couple of ways you could do a 500-foot subdivision and subdivide that into, I think, 8 or 9 different lots. You could employ the cluster provision, cluster bylaw provision of the subdivision, of the zoning code to it as well, but we were not interested in that, and we then got exposed to the entire piece of property, and we started discussing over the course of a year and a half a potential transaction where the land would be sold to Northland, and the use on the land would change as modestly as it could, given the significant value that the property commands. There were another number of other bidders apparently along the way, but one of the things that it seemed to resonate between Mr. Carberry and myself, and the sort of the character of my company was Mr. Carberry's really stewardship of the property over, he's been out there close to 41 years and owned it and more of it. We know that he either sold or it was taken from through an eminent domain proceeding, a 30-acre tract of land to the rear by the MDC at the time.
It's taken by eminent domain.
And taken by eminent domain. So we were able to strike a balance between a use of the property that I like to characterize that is contextually sensitive to the land, the character of the land, the location of the parcel within the town of Milton. In many respects, this area just north or east of the Blue Hill parking lots is the entrance to the town of Milton, whether you proceed down Blue Hill Avenue or Canton Avenue. And it is a character-setting parcel. In my view, that character is what makes it so attractive to everyone, myself, everyone that's in the room, and everyone that drives by it. It's also what makes it so important to try to protect, I think. So we were able to strike a balance between looking at a use of the land, protecting what we felt was most important and what most attractive to the land, and generating a reasonable return on the asset for the family without, as Ned would say, blowing up the property. So since November, really Thanksgiving, Ned and I have been working on relative due diligence items for the property. and then more recently, over the course of the last month, meeting with the very important stakeholders within town and the surrounding neighborhood to the property. So what is the property? The property is 46 acres. It consists of about 1,600 lineal feet of frontage along Canton Ave, which is a scenic road. It has three existing curb cuts. The KC Farm Drive or Field Road right in the middle. The Walcott driveway, which also serves as a driveway to the Walker residence down in the lower corner. And then I'll call it the Manor House driveway that comes in on to the far left if you were on Canton Ave, and coming into the property to service the Manor House and the various structures there. There are about 8 different residences on the property. Manor House, Casey Farmhouse, Walcott House, a couple of guest cottages, the Red Barn, and I can't read one of them, but another one. And they're all populated, but for one, by Carberry residences, family members. Mr. Carberry, who's in his 80s, in the Manor House, and all but one of his sons and daughters are in other houses. They have all taken great care of the various structures over the years. They're not all used. The barns are not. The property has the geologic esker that I referred to on the side there, which really creates a nice sort of setback for that end of the property. The driveway is located where the driveway is because it made sense. Whoever cut that in way back when in the 1700s did so because the land gave it to them. It was an appropriate place to do. There is an intermittent stream that runs out of the Blue Hill Reservation somewhere in the center like that and down through an old dammed pond area that's no longer dammed, and water courses through that intermittent stream seasonally. Probably is running fairly strongly presently, but last fall and during the summer months that I've been on the property, it's been dry. There are no other wetlands on the property that we know about. We have commissioned a wetland scientist to walk the property, flag the resources, and so that an RDA, an ANRAD, can be filed with the Conservation Commission in due course. That would identify and agree upon what those wetland resources are. The natural heritage NH, endangered species, I'm going to lose the acronym, has a portion of the property in the lower left corner mapped as possible habitat for an endangered species. It is likely either, we have applied for an information request to determine what it is that that agency believes exists. We're told that it is likely either rattlesnake or plant. I don't have that information. Topography in the center of the property is relatively gentle. From Canton Ave to the rear of the property, it rises in total 10% in sort of a laddered way. We have done test pits across the property, and the soils remarkably are quite good, quite frankly far better than we anticipated. We haven't encountered ledge. Having said that, we've only dug 12 holes. We haven't dug everywhere. So it is a nice piece of property. The property, you can kind of see some lot lines in there. It consists of 5 primary parcels of land. If I can use the laser thing for a second. There's a parcel right in here, another one in here, a rectangular farm parcel in there, a little 2-acre parcel right in there, and I forget whether this is 1 or 2. If you look at the tax map, The tax maps also show vestiges of a subdivision that was done back in the late 80s that was perfected, but it was never built. And those lots are not of any merit right now. They sort of just cloud the title.
In 1988, the town rezoned, established the AA zoning. But same year that they established zoning for Fuller Village, they established AA zoning here. The Carberry subdivision had been done prior. That's a single A, now grandfathered zoning district. Carberry's, when that happened, got approval for a definitive subdivision plan for all of this lot, and filed that, recorded, but they never took action on it, and ultimately, that approval was lapsed, and the property has reverted to its AA zoning status. As we said earlier, the MDC took this backland by eminent domain in 1991. There was a number of years before the valuation was settled, but it was not a friendly taking. Ultimately, it was resolved through litigation.
Let's see, there is some historic significance to the property overall. The Walcott House was built back in 1672. It housed, Governor Walcott was a 39th governor of our state for about a 3-year period. He built that house. A portion of that house has been dragged down the hill to form the Casey Farmhouse, and then the Manor House was built in the early 1700s. Those two houses, the Walcott and the Manor House, are spectacular in their own right. The Casey Farmhouse is quite nice. I wouldn't say it is of quite the same pedigree as the other two, but nonetheless, they're significant features on the property. We've given you some pictures of some of the other structures that are out there, the barn and some cottages, stables, and other. The next slide tries to depict some of the landforms here. I'll start with the Manor House lawn. This is a view looking up from Canton Ave into the property. You see the Manor House through the trees. You see the majestic white pines that are in the field that really, you know, on a spring, summer day or in the fall, really frame that in a lovely, lovely way. There is a picture in the upper left corner that shows the intermittent stream that has, I don't know who came up with the term channelized, but it's effectively been channelized. There's rigid stone walls on either side of it as it enters the property and then exits into the pond down below and beyond. Then there's some forested woodlands surrounded with stone walls and some open field areas. And so another, next slide, it gives you an aerial sort of depiction. I don't think many people have been up in on the land. And I think it's important that we all get out on the land because it is truly special. The frontage along Canton Ave is what I'd like to call sort of a ragged, naturalized frontage, you know, probably anywhere from 40 or 50 feet deep to much deeper, where it has been casually maintained over the years, but it provides a bit of a pastoral appearance as you drive up and down Canton Ave. There are glimpses into the Casey Farm field and the Manor House field that are truly special as one experiences the property, both on the property and off the property. You can see some of the fields in the rear and some of the forested woodlands elsewhere. You can, the esker that I spoke about earlier is quite pronounced. The dam is in there, or the pond, or the hole.
Yeah, there is a concrete lined, sort of a pool, hole, pond that was used for horse bathing. They would walk the horses through at the end of the day, and bathe them, walk them out. Some years ago, the boards were removed and released, and it's no longer full of water, but the intermittent stream flows down and through that.
So as we started looking at the planning for this, this may sound corny, but this is sort of the approach that I and Northland have employed for its tenure, and it's really about the land. What's important out here? What's worth maintaining? Why is this property considered so valuable? Why is it so? Why are so many people interested in it, and what happens to it? Why am I attracted to it? What makes it special? The manor house field, the Casey Farm field, the pastoral open space feel to it in an urban or suburban. I'll call it urban suburban location. We're inside of 128. We're not out on 495. So it is special. So as we started looking at how do you integrate a different land use plan on the property while at the same time trying to preserve what's special about the property, preserve and protect what's special about those who are around it, value, and while at the same time developing a development plan that will yield a reasonable and fair return to a landowner without blowing up or killing the property. So that was the approach that we employed. What was instructive for me is I spent 1.5 years working with this board. I sat in various working sessions that this board sponsored elsewhere on large lot condominium development, and was a participant as an observer, and I was asked to be a participant as a potential developer. And I tried to listen carefully to the conversations that took place in those discussions and some of the work product that came out of it. So, Tim, if you wouldn't mind, quickly, the land is in a 2-acre zoning district. 2-acre zoning district requires an 80,000 square foot lot with 200 feet of frontage on a definitive subdivision road, which is a 50-foot right-of-way and a 26-foot paved surface and a sidewalk on both sides, and street trees every 150 feet, and radii that don't exceed whatever, big enough for a tractor-trailer truck to go around. The grades don't exceed, I think it's 7%, and the like. So this is simply a representation that if we employ the underlying zoning, prescribed zoning on the property, what might happen on the property. This isn't exactly what might happen, but this is a conceptual drawing of what may happen. It's a yield plan, a density, a proof plan. It shows, I think, 22 lots. I can't quite see it. They're all compliant. We haven't drilled down into, the nits and gnats of every, aspect of developing a definitive plan. We haven't attempted to save anything. We haven't attempted to create buffers or retain some of the amenities or attributes of the property that I find attractive. And I could be done. I could do this. I believe I could support 4 to 5 bedroom septic systems on each of these lots and 4,000 to 5,000 square foot houses. There's a small subdivision off of Brush Hill Road presently going on with 5 or 6 lots on one, a little bigger than 1 acre lots, but,
But it blows up the land.
mini
and it doesn't
McMansions.
achieve the value.
So we started looking at an alternative. Please, Tim. The alternative starts with the land and starts with, okay, let's carve out what we believe should be carved out. So to do, when you go through this, you have a development program that you script to someone, and you say, okay, with this thing in mind, or these programmatic elements in mind, please develop a drawing. First thing was to draw a hard line across the entire frontage of the property as a starting point of a 100-foot setback, nothing in it. Just preserve the first 100 feet. Could it have been 90? Could it have been 125 or 115? We could have been anything. We picked a number to start with of 100. Some of the workshop sessions suggested buffers of 60 feet. I didn't feel 60 feet was appropriate. Carry that same 100-foot buffer along the sides of the property to the greatest degree possible. So all the way up the Carberry Lane, Carberry subdivision, Carberry, the top side of the drawing, carry 100 feet all the way up through there. Carry the 100 feet around the Walker property on the lower left, and recognize that there's possibly an endangered species habitat in the lower corner, and respect that line, to the degree you can pull these lines off of GIS and overlay them on that. To preserve the Manor House, to preserve the Walcott House, to preserve the KC Farmhouse. What do I mean by preserve those? Preserve those in their present form. Rehabilitate them and reuse them as historic structures for residential use going forward. Do not tear them down. To preserve the KC Farm field, which was that large, I think it's a 4-acre rectangular field that runs up in here, and then extend that same preservation down into the lawn area, for lack of better words. To recognize that we have an intermittent stream that runs through the property, and it should be protected. So you'll see gray line or green lines around, it runs through where my pen is, crosses a road, and that pond, or whatever you want to call it, is in here, and then it exits the property in this direction. To recognize that that is a resource that needs to be paid attention to. The esker. The esker is, when you drive in the property, this road right now, and look up, you say, wow, look at that. There's nothing on it for a reason, and there really shouldn't be anything on it for a reason. Can you dig it out? Sure, you could dig it out. It would be a shame. And then the last sort of thing was to determine, of the 3 curb cuts that exist there, in deference to the fact that we have a scenic road here, which one of the 3 or ones of the 3 are most appropriate to try to use. The one in the middle works very well. It's a gentle grade coming down the hill, the sight lines left and right exiting out onto Canton Drive, Granton Road, Canton Ave, excuse me, work quite well. The KC Farm field, you can go left there. It's safe. It's kind of a potato chip turn. You're going down, up, around. I call it that potato chip turn. It shouldn't be a primary access. It shouldn't be something that carries a large volume of traffic because of that left turn issues. It's fine to go right. The road on the lower side that serves as the Walker driveway and the Walcott House driveway, we have not proposed using because we believe it is too close to the Brush Hill Road, Canton Ave, Blue Hill mess. So with that, we began to curl a series of roads in with the aim of developing the property into a condominium community consisting of a total of 75 residences, 5 of which would be located in existing houses. And you'll ask me which one, where are the 5? I can't tell you exactly as I sit here. It could be 6. It could be 7, but some number of them located in the existing houses. And under this scheme, this shows 70 new townhouses. These are 2,500 square foot first floor master bedroom, 2 and 3 bedroom, 2-car garage, full basement, story and a half, New England architecture style residences.
Substantially the same product that's being developed at the St. Pius property. Very similar.
Yeah, and it's substantially the same type of product that I built up in Milton, meaning the programmatic, and it's Milton, Belmont, excuse me, my Belmont project, excuse me. Programmatically, it's the same architectural and housing unit. The skinning and the styling and such it would be different here than I used in Belmont, because it's a different site and a different location, and it would be different than that which I'm doing at the St. Pius site. But what happens in the house is the same. We're trying to develop a community that would be attracted, that would attract baby boomers, active adults, empty nesters. They could be done, that can be done by design, which is what I accomplished at St. Pius and on my Belmont job and the Black Rock job in Hingham. It can also be done via a hard deed restriction, where a permit is issued for the property and no one but a resident of 55 years of age or older can be an occupant, but for, you can have kids over for short periods of time. Metrically, it's a 46-acre tract of land. There are 70 units on it. That math turns into a units per acre metric of 1.67. The green represents about 50% of the land, not about, 50% of the land as open space in this schematic. This is to be refined, but we're proposing that order of magnitude 50% of the 56 acres could be maintained as open space. I would further suggest that I think in a case like this, where you have such a large percentage of the property that can be maintained as open space, it should be maintained as open space, and are valuable open space, pieces like the field, like the manor house, like the buffer along Canton Ave, the Carberry Lane subdivision, the Walker property, or the DCR property, that those should be managed and held in a conservation restriction, or governed by a conservation restriction, and held by a third party. Not held by the condominium association, but held by someone else. I've done this in our Belmont job. The Audubon Society took 101 acres. Not me. In Carlisle, it was the Carlisle Land Trust. In Wayland and Weston, it's been the Sudbury Valley Trustees. I'm doing something in Wellesley presently where 50% of the land is being preserved as open space, and the Wellesley Conservation Council is going to be the recipient of the conservation easement and will be endowed by the developer to pay for certain, operating expenses, if you will. Operating expenses here. Well, what do you mean operating expense? Casey Farm Field ought to be mowed. Manor House Field ought to be mowed. That can be a cost to the CR holder, that can be a cost to the condominium association, or it can be, or something like that. But we've come to learn that CR holders do have expenses in the management, maintenance, and oversight of their holdings. And it has become quite common for there to be some funding mechanism at the inception of the development and then carried forth by either a homeowners association, if it's a subdivision, or a condominium association, if it's a condominium association or the like.
So in that regard, Tuesday night, we were before the Conservation Commission, and we were surprised to learn that the Milton Conservation and Land Trust had actually conveyed its interest in itself to a regional entity that is staffed. And they thought that it was more appropriate for an entity with staff that had management capability would be an entity that would be actively managing these properties. as opposed to 3 trustees who would get out and site walk when they could, how they could. I had talked to John Cronin, who's one of the trustees, that day, and we talked about the conservation restriction. He never even mentioned that they had passed it on, but since then, we have learned that that is the case. So that would be a likely recipient of the CR. It might be the Conservation Commission as a secondary recipient, if for some reason the first, but that would be a detailed negotiation and proper selection of whoever the right entity would be.
So one more slide, Tim, if you don't mind, which we tried to take the previous slide and overlay it on the aerial to try to give people a contextual sense of, well, where are these roads or houses situated in regard to the things that you may know of the property either from the street or having been up in there, and that's what this plan attempts to do. We, in the course of the various conversations with residents, residents groups, and other town folks, I was asked, Ned and I were asked, well, why this? Why not a traditional subdivision of 20 or 22 lots or 21 lots or 19 lots? Why not employ one of the other existing, if you will, as of right special permit provisions of the bylaw? There's several of them. There's the condominium conversion version, and there's the cluster development version, and there's the open space development version. The condominium conversion version, section 6L, we don't think applies to the development of raw land. It appears to apply to the conversion or expansion of existing structures in the property. The open space development is really a full...
With some allowance for additional structures, but it's the unit count's not going to be very significant at the end of the day.
The open space development is really what I call the 4 acre lot subdivision provision. There's the definitive subdivision, and there's the cluster development, section 6J. So, arithmetically, if you go through the process for the cluster development, it will yield 30 to 31 market rate housing units when you grind through all the math. And I won't, since you may know the math, I won't bore you with the math.
Single-family homes.
And then 4 or 5 additional affordable units sort of come with that, using that provision. What's interesting to me from that perspective is, while it produces certainly fewer units on the property than what we're proposing, it produces single-family houses. It produces single-family houses arguably on large lots, small lots. There's a building pod requirement of a minimum of 10,000 square feet. It can be greater than that. A 10,000 square foot building pod or lot supporting one housing unit is 100 by 100, 50 by 200, 200 by 50, however you want to describe it. But it starts, it does 2 things. One, it's essentially bringing to a 2 acre lot neighborhood 10,000 square foot lots. Which I think, I don't think this is a 10,000 square foot lot neighborhood. I don't think this Canton Ave is, or at least this end of Canton Ave, speaks to that. Arguably, if I looked at that, those lots would grow to 20 or 40,000. I'd be looking to develop the land on a single-family lot basis so that it would attract not empty nesters, but families, to maximize that value. By doing so, in my view, I consume more land. It sprawls. Rather than putting things in duplexes, which ideally, if I could do every one of these homes in a duplex, I'd do it in a minute, and maybe that's an input that you all provide to us, or we all provide to us. But I'm able to cluster things together as opposed to start segregating them in chunks 100 feet apart, or 50 feet apart, or 75 feet apart, or whatever the arithmetic is, and pushing it out. There is a 35% open space requirement, which is about 13 acres. Not a big hurdle. So I would envision that plan. I have been asked to develop that plan. As yet, I have not. But I would envision that plan would begin to creep into elements of the property that we think are special and should not be crept into to the greatest degree possible. I also have to say that I don't, as a professional in this business, I don't believe that I know that use is not going to generate the highest value on the end product and doesn't support the land value that the property will command and does command. And I've tried to strike a bargain with the Carberries of monetizing a value at a level that is respectful of the Carberries' stewardship or caretaking of the property over the last, I don't know, what do you say, 43 years or something? That's a conversation. The use of the cluster bylaw is a conversation I know is important to some of the residents and needs to continue. However, I firmly don't believe that it doesn't generate the value. And it doesn't use the land as appropriately as I am attempting to with the development, this initial schematic development.
I think also importantly, it maximizes the impact to the property and the town. Because if you kind of think about single-family, cluster single-family, if you will, and/or townhomes with age restriction, a single-family subdivision in a AA zone yields 22 units. That's 22 new families. One or both of the married couple is working, and the kids are in school, whether they're in public school and private school. They are fully occupied essentially 100% of the year, except for vacation times, and they are contributing to the traffic at the morning and afternoon rush hour, and they are contributing to traffic impacts through the day as kids and other moves are made throughout the week. The cluster single family just ratchets that up, and it goes to 34 or 35 new single-family units, 3 or 4 of which are affordable, but 34 new units that are fully occupied throughout the year, with exception of vacation days. And they contribute more traffic because one or both of the parents will be working, they'll have kids in the schools, and they will be commuting in the rush hour morning and afternoon, and otherwise lots of trips to and from the kids' school activities, etc. The townhome attached approach, 75 units, essentially no children, is occupied about 35 to 40% of the time at any given time during the year. You have sunbirds, snowbirds, people who are in Florida for the winter, people in the Cape during the summer. They are there. They want to be in Milton because they're close to family. They grew up in Milton. They want to stay here. But the traffic impacts, very few of them are going in and out in the morning or afternoon rush hour. And there are no children going to the schools. Maybe there's 1 or 2, but there's essentially no children going to the schools. And there are, so at 40% occupancy, if we're going to be conservative, there are 30 units that are occupied at any one time as opposed to 31 to 34 units occupied essentially all of the time under the cluster bylaw. In addition, the townhome attached cluster is substantially more valuable in terms of the taxpayer to the town. It pays in the order of $800,000, $900,000 in taxes if there are 10 children in the schools. That would be about $120,000 in sort of impact to the schools, with a net of about $775,000 to the net tax benefit to the town. On the alternative, if you've got 22 single families, assuming 1.5 children in school, many of them will be in the public, some will be in the private, but assume that then you've got a total cost, if you're educating all of those kids, about $400,000 as a net to the town of about $170 in new tax revenue. On the cluster side, it gets worse because now you're educating more kids. The cost to educate per child is the same. There's, we think, essentially a net, either a zero or a net negative impact in terms of a tax approach. So from a value perspective, from an impact perspective, from a recognition of what's true and properly important on this property, from the maximization of open space and the value of open space versus the creation of some open space to achieve that 35% requirement of the cluster, or no open space associated with a standard subdivision, all the way around, is a far superior approach to development, in our opinion. Also of significance, Jack has been approached by one of those developers who sought to purchase the property from a 40B perspective. He's offered, excuse me, Brian, I don't want to get you in the head.
He's using the
Blame you.
laser.
But essentially, a 16-acre parcel here. Jack's been offered more for that property than he's paying for the total land. And the offer is to put 300 rental units of housing under 40B. Jack doesn't do that. He's not going to do that. He's not going to sell that property to this guy. He's going to pursue this in cooperation with the town, and hope with the neighborhood, to achieve this outcome. 75 units is the number. I think it's the right number. It's the number that's necessary to achieve the return for the Carberries while respecting the land. The alternative is to gross it up to achieve a 25% affordable component and pursue a parallel track under the state's comprehensive permit process. We will move forward in that regard so that we don't foreclose what is necessary to protect ourselves here as we move through the zoning. We don't want to do it. It's a similar product. There'll be more of it. There will be less open space. We'll preserve as much as you can about what's good, but 125 units will look far different and feel different than 75 units. And with 25% affordables, many of those will come with children. And the impacts associated with that would be more significant than here. So, if you want.
Yeah, I'll sum it up, because I know it's late. We've been asked about affordable housing. There will be an affordable housing element to this. We've been asked in various conversations about the mess, with a capital M, at the Brush Hill Light Road and the impact of traffic in here. Recognize what it is, recognize it's a concern, recognize it needs to be addressed, and feel that we are a conduit to a solution to that, not a contributor to the problem. Other things have come along, traffic calming ideas for Canton Ave, sidewalks on Canton Ave, public access through the property to Blue Hills. It was requested of us in one of the neighborhood meetings. It was kind of requested of us not in another meeting. Light pollution is something that's important, buffer maintenance, and I think those are all very important components to a conversation, a constructive conversation, and there's a lot of conversation about the units. I'm trying to do a couple things. I'm trying to support the creation of 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever the math is, units of affordable housing. I'm trying to support the preservation, the retention, the maintenance of that which is special on the property, those visual amenities. I'm trying to, and I want to, maintain and reuse the significant architectural and historical features on the property. All of those elements, particularly the affordability ones and the historic reuse and rehabilitation, it costs money. They need to be supported by some market rate units. It's a juggling act. I recognize that. Numbers have an optic. Numbers imply different things. The number isn't driven just because I want more. The number has been developed in a thoughtful way, in a careful way. I learned carefully with Ned and you all on the St. Pius site, figure out what the number needs to be. Don't give us some pie-in-the-sky number. Figure out what the number needs to be to make it work. And that's what I'm trying to do. And so Ned and I would hope that conversations can ensue for those with all that are interested and all that are impacted, with an effort to developing a land plan for the property that addresses as many, if not all, of the concerns that can be articulated. I think there's a site walk wanted.
We've scheduled it.
May 7th?
7.
And I would just add quickly on the traffic issue, Jack has retained Vanessa and Associates. They're going to do a corridor study of all of Canton Avenue. They'll study the light. They're going to study Royal Street in Canton, which is a real big part of the problem. And work with the town and MassDOT to see what we can do to improve those intersections and those light sequencing. We'll do traffic counts at Quistit Brook, Home Inc., Fuller Village, which are 3 examples of similar types of zoning that the town has put in place for senior and older housing. Fuller Village is 319 units, essentially across the street, with employees, has no traffic impact. Home Inc. has 98 units on 36 acres. That's 1.5 times the density that's being proposed here. No traffic impact. Quistit Brook is 56 units on 32 acres, same density, 1.7 to the acre, no traffic impact. You wouldn't know either one was there. You certainly have no idea how many are in there until you actually go in there. But we need to prove out those numbers, and we will do traffic counts for those. We'll do traffic counts for the Belmont project and similar project, because the numbers really are the same. We need to prove out those traffic count numbers. It's an important part of the equation, and we'll work with the town et al. To come up with ways to calm traffic, make it work as best we can out there.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much. Any initial comments from the board before we go to the public?
Go ahead. Can be your departing statement.
I only get one? Man. Couple of things. One is I appreciate the fiscal impact numbers for the municipal impact. I think quantifying those and getting them up so we can see them would be helpful. The other thing is, of course, we have done a master plan. We have an adopted master plan, and many of the things that you spoke about speak to what is in the master plan. I think it would do you some good as far as the public presentation to bring forward those things that are consistent and show how they are consistent with that. All, to anybody who may be listening, all development that comes into the town should be referring to our master plan and how it is consistent. That's all I have for the moment.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Okay. I really appreciate your approach to looking at the land and the unique characteristics of the land. I served on the condo working group where we talked about this property as probably being one that some kind of, if we had succeeded with some language, that this property would be prime for that sort of thing. Because what we were talking about is how do we preserve assets, historic landscapes, and historic structures. And these are historic, I think, not only for their architectural character and their historic landscape character, but for history of the Commonwealth. So I think that we can have a balanced development which achieves preservation and allows the present owners to monetize some of their asset, I think is the right approach. And in the first look at the site plan, I think it's a very strong initial site plan. So I'm happy to see what you've chosen to support, to preserve, and what you see. And I agree with you, although I haven't been fortunate enough to be up and tour all the buildings. I'd love to do that. So I'm looking forward to that. But it seems as if you've chosen the things that most people would characterize as what they think of when they go by this property on Canton Ave, in terms of its assets. So I, for one, know that there's a lot of topographic change here, and I think the way these buildings are sited into that topography, one of the things about these existing houses is they're what I would consider well sited relative to the existing land. So I want to make sure that what you do here, and I'm sure you do too, is well sited. But one of the things that I think would be very helpful to understand that is to have a three-dimensional physical model, which would have the topography and have the trees on it, so that we can really understand it, and the neighbors can really understand it. I think so. For a development of this site, I think it's well worth it. On the discussion about the type of development, I personally would rather see it aged by design and not by restriction. I do think that one of the things in the master plan that we talked about was having an increase in the variety of the type of housing. So I don't necessarily, for example, if you had a single parent with one child, this might work well for them. And they may not want or be able to acquire a different kind of single-family house in town. So I think it is something to keep flexible that way. I feel that's important. And then because many people move to Milton, I think, in large part because they're families. They're leaving more urban areas, and they want either schools or a little more space or a few more amenities or what have you. So I think every time we're getting a multi-unit development, I hear about, well, the children. Well, I have 2 children. And I think many people have children. And I think, the property taxes are the way we pay for public education, and there's no doubt that always is going to be a factor. But we also pay for police and fire and many other things with our property taxes. And to keep that balance, we have to have developments, I think, that can help the town in its entirety, not just think about children as being a draw on resources. The affordability, I think we'll need to talk about that and think about that. I think I'm really curious how the condominiums would be carved out of the existing houses, the existing structures. If there's a way to think about the affordable, seniors, this is something we have in the housing production plan. I think there were a lot of good statistics about seniors living alone in single-family houses. So they're like over-housed, if you will. This has come up in I'm serving on an impact advisory group in Boston. It came up on a project we were looking at yesterday. They're actually proposing to do their affordable housing as elderly affordable housing, in which people who own their own houses can actually sell and downsize, because the price points are getting so high that people are stuck in their houses because they can't really sell them if they're on fixed income. So if we think about, there's a lot of elderly in Milton, and maybe we can have something to where they might be able to sell and actually have a place to go for their, and in accommodating that in the affordable component of this. So it's something to think about and maybe research a little bit further.
There was a question asked by us at the selectmen's meeting whether we could consider an increase in the affordable percentages, and that perhaps we could use a different formula for a percentage of those affordables so that there would be less of an impact on the fiscal impact on the development. You know, I think we said that we would look at that. That may require a modest gross up of additional units to account for some additional percentages, but it's something that we committed to the Board of Selectmen to look at.
And then lastly, I wanted to touch on the traffic. I do think it's important to look at it more broadly, as you have already discussed, but I think not just Canton Ave, but some of the intersection that you've talked about, I think is important. And on the Master Plan Committee, we have talked about the need for a town-wide traffic study. And I know I attended the Conservation Commission meeting the other night, and I had mentioned, and Ned and I spoke about the opportunity for the traffic study work that's done here to be able to be incorporated into a broader traffic study, which I think would definitely be beneficial. Those are my comments for now.
Thank you.
What was the date of the approval of the 1988 subdivision?
The upzone to 2. But I think it was 1980. The subdivision was in 1989, just prior to the effective, well, they had filed their preliminary, which froze the zoning
For 7 years.
under subdivision approval. It was, the final subdivision was 89, it was recorded.
It started in 87.
Yeah, the definitive was 1989, and I think because they took no action, they didn't do any infrastructure work, it lapsed after, I think it's 8 years.
One thing about the cluster bylaw, which should be kept in mind, is that the cluster bylaw creates lots, not houses. And so when you have 10% affordable, you don't get a house, you get a lot. Whereas this would produce, maybe not a lot, but it would produce a house.
I guess I have a question on that. If it produces a lot, then who builds the house and how much does it cost?
That is the question. The question, my view is that what happens is you have the affordable lot, it's reserved for a family who can afford it, and at some point they're going to spend, I think, $170,000 for the lot with the house, and you've either got to get Habitat or the town's Affordable Housing Trust to pitch in with additional money.
Or
But
the alternative is the lot comes for free and you build them a house.
well,
and
no,
build the house
I mean,
for
what
70,000,
the
89,000.
alternative is that you produce money. Rather than producing the lot, you produce money in lieu of a lot, because having an affordable lot is not much use. Whereas if you can put a value on it, that money going to the Affordable Housing Trust could then be used. It simply is that the cluster bylaw involves lots, not built lots. And this would involve a built lot or a built pod or whatever you want to call it.
Anything, Mike, before we go to public? All right. I assume there are a few people here who'd like to speak to this, so I'm going to ask the applicant to step back.
You might just note again that this is not a public hearing, but an informational, and this is not actually in front of the board at this
that.
point, yeah.
So before we have anyone come forward, this is an informational meeting as opposed to a hearing. So we are asking people if they'd like to come up and make comments, they can do so, but we may or may not have the applicant answer questions. They may or may not answer questions. But we appreciate your feedback as we're to the original presentation.
And there's no action that we're taking on this.
Correct, yes. Yeah. There is no action tonight. There is no application before us. This is simply informational.
We actually hope to be working with the board through the summer in the drafting of zoning amendments, whatever is the appropriate zoning vehicle, so we can achieve an outcome at town meeting in the fall.
Alex.
That's what I was going to say. It seems to me that the neighborhood discussions are ongoing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rather than this.
But what I meant to say is that this is not a formal application that we are
No,
in any way
I
voting on at the
understand.
moment.
This
I want to
is-
make sure everybody else understands
Right.
that as well, yeah.
And that, yeah, that this is not necessarily set in stone.
Right, absolutely.
Well, they say it's not set in stone, so I'll take them.
Okay. Who would like to speak? Come on up. Please identify yourself with your name and your address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Hale Smith. I'm a 38-year owner at a home at 1632 Canton Avenue, and have met with Mr. Dolly and Mr. Corcoran. They actually visited me and my wife at our home about a month ago, and they've also met with members of the neighborhood, as Mr. Dolly related. I am not at all against development on this parcel, and in fact, know that it's going to happen. I am very concerned about the density. By right, under AA zoning, there's 22 lots, as has been noted this evening. This proposal more than triples that. And speaking for myself, not for the other neighbors who may be here, I feel that a condominium townhouse development in this part of Milton is not appropriate, and it's not going to protect the values of the current residents of Canton Avenue. So that's about all I have to say. I think there are a number of issues that will come up during your review. I'd very much like to see Northland Properties residential do a thorough investigation of the new cluster zoning bylaw that was passed in 2014. They have not done that yet. When you're coming to the town and asking for a major development, this is going to be the largest development that Milton will probably ever see, in the future. This is the last large remaining lot. I think it deserves as thorough investigation of all the possibilities as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Hello. Hugh Hyatt. I live at 6 Carberry Lane. And I am not against development either. I actually am a fan of the Milton Master Plan. But one thing that I think is not accurate in what we heard tonight is the type of person that's going to be buying this. It says 55 plus by design, and what we've heard from Mr. Dolly and his attorney is that people my age and many of our neighbors' age don't spend a lot of time coming and going. And I'm just here to tell you that we do. In fact, one of my neighbors, I won't say his age, but he's over 55, has 5 kids that he drives all over the place. And all of us sit right now in what they've conceded is a big mess. The mess being the traffic that backs up from the Brush Hill Light all the way down past the Carberry Estate, past Carberry Lane where we live, all the way up to Dollar Lane sometimes. So for those of us that are in our 50s, I'm not quite 55, but I will be well into my 60s before anybody goes, I believe, close to 60 before anyone goes to college, and well into my 60s when the last of my kids go to college. And even after that, I'm still going to be coming and going. I'm not going to be on the vineyard in the summer and in Florida in the winter. I just ask that we all not take for granted that people over 55 aren't really going to be moving around a lot. I submit otherwise, particularly those of us, I'm the last of the baby boom generation. We're going to be very active, and we are going to be driving, and we're going to be doing things and going places. So I just want to make sure we don't take for granted what's been proposed tonight, that there may not be much impact on traffic. It really is a big problem as it exists now. And so tripling what's permissible under current law is really going to be a burden on all of us. And I don't know that there's enough of a benefit in what's been proposed to the town to outweigh the inconvenience to all of the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey there. My name's Laura Beebe. I'm not a direct abutter, but I'm a nearby neighbor. I live on Canton Avenue. I've only lived in Milton for 8 years, but my family's been in Milton since 1865. Living near the Blue Hills has made me very aware of conservation. I worry about the impact of a development like this on Canton Avenue, but I also worry about the impact on the Blue Hills. This kind of property, as it's been, has provided a kind of ecological buffer. And I fear that development of this nature will be a real imposition on that. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Jack Weeks. I'm a direct abutter. I own 2 Carberry Lane, and I also own 1636 Canton Avenue, which abuts directly the property. Several points that I noticed. Number one, your aerial view is something that shows no clearing. It is just simply building blocks put on top of trees. It doesn't indicate the type of development, the type of clearing, the type of road work, the expansion of the road, and everything else that will be done on that property. So although it's a representation of where the buildings would be, it doesn't represent the clearing that'll take place. The second thing is, he mentions that, Mr. Dolly mentions that it's 2-car garages for each of the 75 units. Those are 4-car garage, single-family homes then. So his automobile impact is he's admitting that we're talking about twice as many cars as most normal homes have. Those of us who live on Carberry Lane will tell you that most homes have 2 vehicles, 2-car garage. His would be 37 and a half homes with 4-car garage. So I think that the impact of the cars and the vehicles that come into that property will be significantly higher than what it would be if you did cluster development or if you did a single family 22-acre, 22-unit. I don't believe you could get 22 units in developing that property, but assuming that you could, I don't think the impact is going to be as great as what 75 units bring to us. I'm not opposed to development. Mr. Carberry and Mr. Dolly have a right to develop their property as they see fit. I would mention that in 2008, on 1636 Canton Avenue, I sought an easement just to move the house. And Mr. Carberry attended that meeting and opposed it, citing that it's a double-acre, double-A block. So I'm kind of surprised that the concern with open spaces and what was going to be applied to in 2008 would now change in 2016. Traffic, to say that traffic is mitigated simply by easing or changing the light sequence, I would think would undermine all that the Transportation Department here in Milton has done. I can't believe that for all this period of time, they haven't looked at light sequencing as a mitigating factor for 138 and Canton Avenue, that intersection. So I think that it's very, very complicated what is going to go on. I also think that it's going to be 4 years of construction. It's going to be very, very disruptive to the neighborhood. It's going to be very, very disruptive to the feel of the neighborhood. And for those reasons, I just ask that you consider the impact that this kind of development would have upon that whole area of Milton, which is considerably different than any other part of Milton in many, many different ways. So thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, saw your hand.
Ted Phillips, 28 Hemlock Drive. We've already hit traffic a couple times. Density, I think, for more reasons than just the number of people or number of cars. We're talking 37 buildings that more or less all look identical and look alike, tucked next to the Blue Hills, obstructing the view of the Blue Hills from Canton Avenue. If you go down Canton Avenue, you'll notice every single house in this area is unique and different. There's a character to that. Carberry Lane, all built at the same time. Each house unique and different. No duplicate floor plans. Hemlock Drive, developed in the 1950s. Again, unique, more or less. There are two houses similar. One happens to be mine. But unique floor plans and designs. So the character of the community will be changed, just the aesthetic character in looking at it. I can't ignore the proximity of the Blue Hills. A statement was made that, look, Fuller Village is just across the street. Well, it is a lifetime away. Blue Hill Avenue on the far side versus Canton Avenue on the other side. Yeah, maybe it's 200 feet, maybe it's 300 feet, but you make that V and life changes. Hemlock Drive straddles both. I can tell you, it's just a different world on either side of Hemlock Drive. So you want to, I am very concerned of keeping the character of Canton Avenue as the entrance into Milton. And I think we need to very much preserve that. I love the open space and the keeping of the Manor Field and Casey Farms. I'm more concerned of looking at the back doors of 25 units along Canton Avenue before I get to that. I really don't want to look into everybody's room and see big screen TVs all the way down Canton Avenue.
Thank you.
My name is Barry Woods. I live in number 8 Carberry Lane. And like many of my neighbours, I have been walking the Blue Hills for about 39 years. And I had an opportunity to live close to Carberry Lane, in Carberry Lane recently in the last 20 years. I sat in this room in 1988, 89, when there was plans to put 50 homes in 1 acre zoning on that property. It was vehemently opposed by a lot of people in the town, and it then became 2 acre zoning. And any plans for further building was dwindled thereafter till now. Living there day to day, it's one of the most beautiful parts of the Commonwealth. There's huge history there. At least 3 governors, Dever House, the Walcott House, and across the street, Governor Sargent. But it's more than that. It's just an incredibly beautiful place for the people to enjoy. I'm not adverse to development, but land is getting scarce. I go out there at 5:30 in the morning up Canton Ave. It's like the Indy 500. There are people coming on off 138 at 58 miles an hour on average, By the time they get to Carberry Lane, they're down to 45 miles an hour. And we fortunately have not had a fatality yet. But there are bikelists that use this road every morning on the Blue Hills, going up the Blue Hills. There's walkers, there's joggers. And the density of more traffic is certainly going to be a big problem. A serious problem. And I very much am in favor of development of some type up there, something that would use the 2 acres and aesthetically maintain the bucolic nature of the area. I've had the unfortunate experience of a dam on that property was blown out behind my house, and fortunately the Conservation Commission took a look at the situation and realized that it had to be re-established. Every time there's a heavy rainstorm, my basement pumps are going off. There's a lot of underground streams in this area, and so any amount of snow melting or heavy rains, we end up with a significant stream to the left of our home, gushing down all the way to Hemingway Pond and further down at the back of Curry into the Neponset River. So I'm very, very aware of the whole area, whether it's the Mews area or whether it's Blue Hills. But it's a real gem for the community of Milton and for the surrounding towns, but also the number of people who come to ski there in the winter. We have a parking issue. They're parking further down Canton Ave in front of Walker's house on weekends. So there's a lot of potential problems with the density of traffic and also the environmental effect. There are endangered species up there, and we need to protect them. I do recall when Mr. Carberry owned 74 acres, and 30 acres were taken by eminent domain. But it's one of the last beautiful parts of this great town of Milton. We should all be able to enjoy it. But to look, you know, there's no other buildings of this character that are planned in the area. Even Fuller Village, which I'm very familiar with, has settled nicely into the community there. But again, the density of traffic, because Milton is a cut-through town from 4:30 in the morning till 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening. And when you live on that stretch of road, there are now 37 children living between Dollar Lane and Walker's house. They try to walk to the Blue Hills. It's impossible. We need 6 speed bumps up there, and we need a sidewalk for pedestrians. If you look at the signposts that I found the other day down near the Neponset River, the Saltonstall bike path sign was just dumped out of sight. And that pathway is supposed to be part of the green circle around Boston, the Emerald Pathway. And people do like to come out to enjoy the Blue Hills. So we'd like to maintain the least amount of density and the opportunity to enjoy the environment. And for everybody. People travel from far. A number of years ago, the governor removed a bridge over 128 that was originally built to bring the highway into Boston through Hyde Park. And that bridge, for 40 years, was an access for people to park in Canton and walk over to the Blue Hills rather on weekends. It's disappeared. So now they're parking anywhere they find. So I think we have a lot of thought to put into this. It's one of the last areas in Milton where there's a lot of open space. And I think it could be done aesthetically and also with respect for the neighborhood, but also for the future generations. All of us in this room, we're really only caretakers. We're responsible for the future generations and what they should be able to enjoy. And I'm very great believer in the open spaces environmental protection, and endangered species. Tonight there's 2 coyotes in our backyard. So we have 8 deer on average every morning. And that's a whole other issue, but I hope that when the time comes, we'll be rational and favorable to Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, anything else from applicant? All right. Well, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anything that anybody has for zoning this evening? I'm going to make a recommendation that we, starting after town meeting, begin to put a zoning item on the agenda for each meeting to discuss. And we can start doing that because we can, if you want to submit ideas to me, we have the list anyway. We can start working on that.
Mike, did you hear what Brian just suggested?
No.
He put you in charge of it.
Yeah, Mike. So thank you, Mike. Meeting's over. Thank you, Mike.
Not yet.
So we'll start putting zoning items on the agenda, starting after town meeting, one per week, so that we can spend some time on each one. Tim, perhaps you could actually draft a schedule for us based on the items we've identified, and we can look at it at the April 28th meeting, perhaps as part of our zoning discussion, and then move forward with that schedule starting on May 14th. 12th.
Do you want to maybe
See you,
take a few
Cheryl.
minutes to talk about scheduling? I know at the last meeting, you had talked about a joint meeting with the selectmen, the building commissioner, and the sign review committee to talk about sign process. I spoke with Anne-Marie Fagan about that, and she said she recommended to pick a date and sort of extend an invitation to the selectmen to come to that meeting, and then obviously we can extend the same invitation to the sign review committee and the building inspector.
I think it makes good sense. The date should be after town meeting and after the election. I know
so
at least one of the selectmen is quite busy with the election season, and not everyone's getting ready for town meeting at this point.
So I will put that on the agenda for next meeting.
So perhaps you could also propose a couple of dates. You can propose a draft schedule for the specific
What about
items
May
that we can
28th
discuss.
or about that?
Yeah, I mean, that would be fine. We could just go to the next meeting. May 20, yeah. Yep.
Or would it be the 26th?
26th, yeah.
You want
28th
to do it
December.
at a regularly scheduled planning
Why
board
not
meeting?
just have them come in?
It's a zoning issue. We can use that as our scheduled time for that meeting. So if we want to schedule that one on the, that can be part of the draft schedule, is the May 26th, we'll talk about signs. Cheryl, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, 2 things. The Master Plan Implementation Committee will be meeting either at the end of the month or the very beginning of May. And what we had agreed at our last meeting was that we divvied up the goal sections of the master plan, and people were looking at what board or body was recommended to be taking the lead on the implementation of that. So coming out of that, I fully expect that there will be a list of things that the planning board is to be taking the lead on, and that I would like that to be factored into what we set about for a calendar of things that we need to address.
That sounds good.
Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to discuss is we do have articles that will be in the warrant for,
Yes.
right? And we, even though we've said we want to send them back to the planning board for further study, we also have said we want to have some discussion at town meeting. So I wanted to discuss if we're going to do a presentation to talk about at least what the ideas or the goals of those articles are, is to help facilitate discussion. So I don't know how we expect discussion to go if we said these articles are being sent back and we want your feedback, and then we just have people respond without having some background, I guess, is what I'm trying. us to be a little bit proactive about what we want to do at that time when we have town meeting members' attention, I guess.
It seems to me we should wait for the new member on the 28th before we decide whether we're going to do this or not.
Awesome.
Because I think that my own view is that people are going to want to leave, since these things will be at the end of the warrant. And since they're going nowhere, people may not want to discuss them. But I think we should discuss it on the 28th with the new member.
All right, but I will say that people are interested in the articles. That's why they've come to our meetings, and that's why there's lots of comments posted on social media. So I think we should think about a way in which to take stock of that. We have perhaps 275 people who will be there, and there may be some who want to help us think about how we move forward, even if it's just with process. Because some people have come to us here to say they didn't think that the process that has been followed thus far was effective or good, and maybe people would like to give us some suggestions of how they think this should be moving forward. I mean, the thing about it is I think anyway, we need to think about this, is that the implementation of the master plan is going to require us to take a look at our zoning. And if we keep saying that it's not going ahead or it's getting kicked down the road another 6 months or a year, then I think we will begin to question whether the master plan is something that's really just going to sit on the shelf. And so I would like us to design a process. It can be with however much community input into the designing of that process, but I would like us to be serious about designing a process.
I thought Brian actually at the beginning of this discussion did just that. He said we are going to put a zoning article. I mean, it seems to me still we haven't discussed bed and breakfast as a board. Still we haven't discussed the non-conforming business thing as a board. Taking it directly to town meeting seems to me not a good process.
But they're on the warrant.
I understand they are, but
Okay.
but
I had my hand up.
Emily.
is this it, Emily?
I was not going to make a particular motion, but I was going to point out that I don't think the board has anything else scheduled for April 28th. So having an extended discussion that night makes a lot of sense. And then also to add to your schedule, the reorganization of the board after town meeting would probably be on May 12th as well. So.
Yes.
The board usually
Right.
reorganizes after town meeting.
After town
So
meeting?
just
Okay.
as a reminder
Okay.
that would happen probably May 12th. That's all I had.
That's it?
That's it.
That's it for forever?
We
Well, I
invite
could probably come up with a couple more things.
we invite you to come to Citizen Speak anytime, by the way.
I may just do that. Would you like an extended dissertation, or I see the hour is getting late?
Well, the nice thing is that we're going to be discussing zoning all the time, so we will
Love it.
certainly have you in for bed and breakfast.
I will give that my every consideration.
I think it's a good. Thank you for raising
Yeah.
the town meeting issue. We will definitely discuss that on the 28th when we have our new member and come up with a plan, whatever it may be, because that's a good catch. We'll need to prepare for that.
Yes, definitely.
A plan on what type of, if any, presentation we'll have?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Give it a couple of weeks to think about it as well.
Excuse me. Any other business? And
Party
from
comments, Emily?
I'm going to give Emily the final word, but Bill, Tim, Julia, anything from staff that we need to hear? All right, Emily.
It's been a pleasure, Emily.
Thank you. Well,
Oh,
then,
we're doing well tonight. We're being very efficient with a
in
lot
that
on the
case,
agenda.
for the very last time, Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn.
And I second that.
Right, all in favor?
Aye.
It has been a real pleasure, all of you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Emily.